Hello, it's Cried here, with the last Euporia guide you will ever need to watch. After this video, you will know precisely how the special mechanics of Euporia works, the optimized Euporia build, and how to play it. In fact, it will be so detailed, you're about to graduate with a minor in Euporia studies. Let's get the basic introduction out of the way. Euporia is a faith-based twin blade, so you want to be investing into faith. Faith is the only attribute that scales the bullet portion of Euporia's weapon art as well, which is where the majority of the damage from the weapon art comes from. Euporia's weapon art is greatly buffed by its unique luster mechanic. Consuming a tier 1 luster allows you to shoot projectiles, and consuming a tier 2 luster will extend your weapon art's duration. You definitely want to be using this weapon art when you have luster, because the base weapon art itself is quite lackluster. Excuse my pun. Save for some undead enemies, attacking with the Euporia generates what I'm going to be calling luster points, which makes the weapon glow when reaching certain thresholds. There are two luster states, the half-charged and fully charged, which gives 95 and 120 holy attack respectively. I'm sure most Euporia users know these basics by now, but the real lesson starts here. Each attack has a different luster point generation value assigned to the Euporia. These are its one-handed attack values. All one-handed attacks generate 8 luster points. As Euporia is a twin blade though, its one-handed moveset is not the ideal way to play it. And to not bore you too much, it also generates stacks slower with its one-handed moveset, so you can forget about these values. The mounted attacks also grant 8 luster stacks per hit. While you can't cast your weapon art while mounted, charging the Euporia up with your charging mount attack is actually a fast option. Anyways, what we are left with are the two-handed moveset and the Powerstanced moveset. One thing to note about the Euporia is that this weapon generates luster points even on your offhand, like if you Powerstance this weapon with another twin blade in your main hand. But Powerstancing the Euporia with another Euporia is definitely a lot faster for generating points. Furthermore, it does not require more total points to trigger the luster tiers of Euporia. Both Euporias will gain the same tier of buff at the same time. But when you cast your weapon art, both weapons will also lose their luster at the same time, so you can't just cast its ash twice in a row. But is Powerstancing Euporia the optimal way to play it, or is two-handing it better? Let me answer that question for you. The values required to reach Euporia's 2 luster tiers are 25 for the half-charged and 50 for the fully charged. Let's give you an example. Two-handed running light attack grants 12 points if you land both hits, so landing 2 of these gives you 24 points, which is not enough to obtain the tier 1 buff. A two-handed running heavy attack though gives you 14 points total, so landing a two-handed running heavy attack followed by a running light attack, or vice versa, should grant you a tier 1 buff, right? The answer is no, because Euporia's luster points begin decaying at 1 luster per second from the moment you first land your attack, so you need to account for that too. When your luster points fall to 0, you lose your luster buff. Additionally, there is a 5-second bonus to the duration of your luster stacks after reaching your tier 1 buff. You can see this effect by letting Euporia decay from its fully charged state. When you do this, you will see that it always only takes Euporia 25 seconds to decay from half-charged to no buff, as opposed to over 30 seconds when decaying from the half-charged state without reaching the full-charged state. I don't know the upper limit of Euporia's luster stacks, but the upper limit is more than high enough, and really not that important since you want to be spending the luster buff anyway. You can easily have enough luster points for the full charge state to last for minutes before a boss fight. Alright, so what is the best way to charge up Euporia? The rolling attack is situational, and you won't be spamming it. It should be pretty obvious that it doesn't have high DPS or point count, even though it's perfectly fine to work it into your offense after dodging. It's just not going to be a spammable. The two-handed jump attacks for Twin Blades are not great either. Spamming these are very inefficient, so let's eliminate these first. We begin by taking a look at the two-handed charged heavy attack of Euporia. Each charged heavy happens to grant you 28 points, which is enough to jump you up a tier immediately. Charged heavies of weapons generally do higher stance damage than most other attacks as well. If the charged heavy is good, we obviously want to be using it. If we take a look at the frame data, and let's just keep it simple by saying we dodge cancel out of the move we're looking at. This is the number of points we get for the number of frames needed. Translate this to some easier to understand language, and you'll see that you're getting roughly 12 luster points per second. The problem with the charged heavy of Twin Blades is that it doesn't have any hyper armor. The slow speed makes it more difficult to use, so ideally, we will want to use other moves if they're better. Let's compare the charged heavy to the normal heavies to see if it holds up. Here is the frame data for doing 2 heavy attack chains in a row. Even without the math, you can probably guess that normal heavy attacks are pretty bad, as it takes 4 consecutive heavies to push into tier 2. As you see here, it takes much longer for heavy attacks to increase our luster state. You will basically never use these since the light attack chain coming up next is just better. Using the same rule, I will show you the point count per frame. This is how many points each hit of the light attack chain grants. Summing them up with their frame data, this is what we get. Convert it to points per second, and you clearly see that the light attack chain easily wins in terms of luster points per second. We see that the light attack chain does indeed enter both luster tiers faster than the charged heavy attack. Light attacks are definitely the fastest way to stack your luster, and also fairly safe, as you don't need to rely on a long window for charging up a charged heavy, which might altogether fail to land. Furthermore, light attacks also have the highest raw DPS, but we do indeed lose out on stance damage compared to the charged heavies. So if you find an opportunity to safely pull off charged heavy and you want to do stance damage as well, there is still a reason to use it. Even though you will rarely be pulling off an entire light attack chain in one go, the same can be said for charged heavy attacks. You can compare 3 light attacks to one single charged heavy attack, as pulling off 3 light attacks is faster than 1 charged heavy, and doing twice of either without a long delay will bring you to your fully charged state. Let's also take a look at mixing in the 2 running attacks. In my opinion, it is smoother to run up to our enemies with a running attack before our light attack chain, rather than stopping our run to perform the light attack chain. The light running attack gives us 12 luster points, while the heavy running gives us 14. In terms of damage, the heavy attack also takes the lead. But there is one big difference between the 2 running attacks, which is the cancel frames. Running light attack allows us to chain into our light attack a whole 11 frames faster than the running heavy attack. This is a huge difference, which will allow the light running attack to be much faster for chaining into your light attack chain. On the other hand, the heavy running attack actually allows you to dodge cancel before the light running attack does. So if you know you're going to have to dodge right away after performing the running attack, go with the running heavy for a quick poke. These are the updated values of our light attack chain with the running light attack performed beforehand, taking into account all the points and frames the running attack grants you. Compared to only purely light attack, it is a tad bit less efficient when it comes to point per second, but much smoother in the gameplay department. Besides, we can buff our running attack practically for free with our armor as well, so I do like to mix in the running light attack at the start of my chain when I'm approaching my target. As for the paired moveset, FromSoft knows that the pair jumping attack is the most spammed Twin Blade skill. Even if you hold 2 Euporias, you're only generating 8 luster points per jump attack, which is one of the slowest ways to build up luster. and a quick calculation for the paired light attack chain will show that it doesn't build up luster fast either. So even if you want to power stance Euporia and focus on the damage over the weapon art, you would still prefer building up stacks quickly through the two-handed moveset before swapping over to power stancing for raw damage. And here is where I cover the final two-handed move, the two-handed guard counter. This is not really a spammable, but it does give you 14 luster points. And since I do think that two-handing the Euporia is the best way to go, working in the deflecting hard tier into our crystal tier setup is great. This is because instead of spamming the charged heavy attack for poise damage, I prefer spamming the light attack chain and relying on the guard counter for stance damage on bosses. Outside bosses, you don't really need to guard. We can make up for the stance damage loss of not using charged heavy attacks with guard counters in order to stance break enemies to safely land our weapon art. And the Holy Shrouding Crack tier should be self-explanatory. These are the talismans that I'm running. For bosses, I do switch the Dragon Crest Great Shield for the Great Shield Talisman though. Because the Euporia's guard boost is on the lower side of weapons that I would consider deflecting with, I find that the Great Shield Talisman really helps with the stamina when fighting aggressive bosses. If you are going for the two-handed setup like I recommend, the two-handed sword talisman is just better than the Rotten Wing Sword insignia. But here are some other decent replacements for the build. I do want to quickly explain why I'm not running the Pearl Shield Talisman for deflecting builds though. You guys should know that plenty of elemental attacks are wide radius types that you don't really deflect but dodge instead. So this talisman is not nearly as useful as the Dragon Crest Great Shield or the specific elemental negation ones. For incantations, I highly suggest mixing in your own choice of damage incantations, especially ones that don't deal holy damage for fights versus enemies with high holy resistance. Incantations are also very useful on enemies where you can't charge Euporia. What you want to mix in is completely up to you, but if we're just talking about new DLC incantations, both the Knight's Lightning Spear and Pest Threat Spears are good. Give them a try if you haven't yet. Obviously, no need to pass up on Golden Vow and your greater barrier of choice, but I myself run the Sword of Light, which shares the same buff slot as greater barriers. This sword's weapon art grants you a 20% holy damage bonus for 60 seconds, which is a lot easier to use than its counterpart, the Sword of Darkness, which makes hit enemies take 20% more holy damage for 60 seconds. If you have both of them, they do stack, but it's too much of a hassle in my opinion, and it's much easier to buff up with the Sword of Light. As for the armor, I went with the white and gold armor theme, while still getting 51 points for PvE. The Leza's armor works really well with this build, as it provides 10% damage to backstep, dash, and rolling attacks, which includes crouch attacks as well. Since working in running and rolling attacks is not a bad idea, this is just a bit of free damage, even though these attacks won't take up a large portion of our overall damage. And finally, this is the stat distribution I'm running with. Damage stats for Euporia, and the rest goes into making sure you have enough FP and tankiness for your build. You have enough FP to cast 5 vortexes before needing to refill. Congratulations on getting your Euporia diploma. Like and subscribe for more in-depth guides like this one. If you want to support my work, please consider buying my fantasy novel or donating to my Patreon down below. With a book purchase, you can also request a topic from me. Krite, signing out.